Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Reframe. I'm the former executive director of the Colorado Department of Corrections. I'm moderating the panel today that's understanding the unique needs of the correctional workforce. You know, as many of you do, working in corrections can be incredibly rewarding because of the opportunity of helping people turn their lives around. However, for those in corrections, unique needs are presented because it's also one of the most demanding, stressful, toughest, and dangerous jobs out there. In addition, there's a current national crisis involving staffing in corrections that is sweeping the nations and creating terrible problems and additional stresses. So this presents unique needs from everything from staff wellness to recruitment and retention and additional training. As we all know, there's a high incident rates of suicide, of domestic abuse, of addiction. And this panel of experts today are going to be addressing some of those issues. So we have, as panelists, Alan Cormier, the Chief of Operations for the Vermont Department of Corrections, Jeffrey Lynn, the Associate Professor of the University of Denver, Dana Plunkett-Cafourek of the Prison Research Innovative Network Manager for the Missouri Department of Corrections, Scott Semple, the former Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Corrections, will make up our panel today. So let's start out with our first question, and I'll address that to Scott and Alan. Let's start with some of the high-level issues to our two leaders on the panel, former Commissioner Scott Semple and Chief Alan Cormier. What are some of the biggest challenges faced by administrators who manage correctional staff today?
Alan, you want to start us out?
Oh, I can do that. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think for us right now, COVID has certainly been a major issue impacting, I think, every correctional system in the country right now. You know, from a PREN standpoint, managing the expectations of staff, keeping staff engaged throughout the PREN process has been very challenging. We have limited movement in our facilities, extended lockdowns, quarantine, isolation, testing. You know, the Department of Corrections, we've tested over 50,000 individuals in our custody since the onset of the pandemic. 874 incarcerated individuals and 474 staff with COVID in a small system like Vermont. I mean, we have a total incarcerated population of 1,300. So our state, as well as we have done, it has been a massive challenge from a staffing standpoint, from a staff burnout standpoint. Staff are tired, and COVID has certainly impacted that. So I would say that is one of the biggest challenges facing us right now, and we're working our way out of COVID, getting back to some normalcy in our operations. But that has certainly been one of the biggest ones for us in the last 2 years anyway.
Now, I would just add to Alan's remarks, and I wholeheartedly agree with him that aside from the obvious issues with recruitment and retention that were discussed earlier, and I believe we're going to discuss as part of this panel, I also think some of the big challenges in systems and jurisdictions around the country right now is understanding the complexity with regard to cultural competency. And coupled with that is the complex aspects of succession planning and training. Training is in our systems now is, I like to refer to it as a black and white thought process, where our training academies and correctional systems teach folks to abide by policies, regulations, and procedures, and don't dive deep enough into informed ways of getting correctional professionals to engage with staff, engage with incarcerated people in a manner that is going to induce better relationships, better working relationships, and a better ability to influence the work of correction. And as I always like to say, that if you're not in the business of correcting, then you're in the business of incapacitation. And that being said, I think we have to relook at how our academies are presenting curriculum to correctional professionals and kind of evaluate what the outcomes need to look like. In addition to that, I also think that we need to have a cohesive response to mental health and medical delivery for the population as it applies to the health and wellness of both the incarcerated population and staff. And then there's another layer, the people who care about the incarcerated populations, family and loved ones as well, who are all impacted by folks that are in carceral settings. So the outcomes of all of these kind of challenges needs to evolve around building trust and giving people some semblance of hope.
Thank you, Alan. As far as your comments, with COVID, I mean, every corrections department has emergency plans, but those plans didn't even come close to covering a COVID type situation. And when I talk about it, I say, not only was there no map, there was no road. And so it'd be one step forward and two steps backwards. It's been, frankly, quite amazing to see how some corrections departments were able to effectively and positively deal with this disaster. And for Scott and I have both had the opportunity to visit some European systems. And one thing that hit us mainly was that we use the term normalcy within these facilities. And that covers a lot what Scott was talking about, which is, the greatest thing that can be taken away from someone incarcerated is their freedom. And once that's done, then to try and make everything as normal as possible to, as was previously stated on a different panel, have them begin to get ready for reentry the minute they enter the institution. Jeff, a foundation of the Prison Research Initiative is to use evidence to support reform. And researchers have used a few different methods to evaluate how correctional staff feel about their work. And I know you're quite involved in this. I'm wondering if you could talk with us a bit about some of the ways you connected with correctional staff in Colorado and what the results were.
Yeah, happy to. So, I mean, I think the bottom line of that is that it was challenging and it remains challenging in certain ways. I think one of the foundational issues that sits under everything is that correctional staff have generally not had good experiences with researchers in the past. And there are a lot of different things that are considered research that come across their desks, different surveys, whatever questionnaires that they answer. And then the data sort of disappear and they don't know what happened with it or why they did the thing or nothing changed. And so the default orientation among correctional staff is generally skepticism. And that was the major challenge that we knew we would have to overcome, that we've been trying to overcome, and that we will continue to try to overcome it. But I will say we've been relatively successful in that. And the main reason why is time, and access. So being inside, Warden Long, the Department of Corrections, the management staff of Sterling Correctional Facility, they've given us a lot of access. They've given us a lot of freedom to conduct our research. They've been really helpful in helping us communicate the reasons behind our research and what we hope to accomplish with the research. And obviously what's different about this project is the research doesn't end when the data are collected and we disappear. Rather, we have been saying since the beginning, because it's true, that we will remain on site and we are going to take the data and take the research and use that in a community-based process to innovate within the prison or engineer changes in the prison. And so that is what looks a lot different from prior research. I think the fact that, we are committing to embedding in the institution to some extent, really getting to know the rhythms and the ecology of the place. And also that our research is not done for selfish purposes as much as a lot of research can be. Obviously, the kind of priorities in academia are publication and high level publication. And so, there is a history of correctional researchers coming in, collecting their data, disappearing, writing a book, writing some high level articles, and really never coming back and using the information to make change. Shannon Sleva and I, that doesn't sit particularly well with us. And we are we're doing this work because we want to help the people who live and work inside the prison. And so, in terms of the staff, ways that we've built trust over, this long period of time are, having both formal and informal interactions with them in which we, explain the purpose of the research over and over again, state over and over again our commitment to it, that, we really are committed to helping them, that this is, again, not for selfish purposes. This is not for us to get a big hit on our CV or anything like that. I mean, it'd be nice if those things happened, but that's not the primary purpose of this. And so some of that has involved sort of some guidance around what research is, because I think there are a lot of different things that have been considered research in the past. So you might get a survey about food quality or, a kind of small kind of sideline survey like that. And you don't necessarily want to equate that with, $1 million national level 5-state project like we're running right now, which has just a different scope and a different intent and a different potential impact. So there have been a number of kind of formal ways that we've connected, both in kind of like informal and sort of presentations to different groups and all facility presentations, but also in the fact that we've formed 3 critical bodies in the institution: an advisory board of incarcerated people, an advisory board of line staff. So it's lieutenants and below, and then we have a steering committee comprised of the wardens, managers who are the majors there, and a couple of selected captains as well. So we have these 3 bodies that we use for multiple purposes, both to ask them about our research products, like about the survey we wrote or interviews that we plan on doing or analyses that we're running or results that we have, but also to advocate for us in the institution. And so we work with them very closely. Those bodies have been relatively consistent over the couple of years now. And so we've been able to build trust, especially with those who've remained on those bodies over time. Obviously, there's turnover because of release or other reasons. Sometimes people want to leave, people quit, obviously, or don't want to be a part of it anymore. But we've had good consistency across those. And they also are able to go out to their peers and speak honestly about what they think of us. We're not telling them to, talk about us like we're the greatest or we're perfect or everything we're doing is perfect, but just, we say, just be honest about what you think about us and what you think about the promise of this project. That's all we can really ask of you. And so that helps build legitimacy with those specific people. And it allows them to go out and just speak honestly about what they think. And if they're telling people they don't think the project is going to do anything or there's going to be no impact, that's their business to do so. But, obviously the conversations among incarcerated people and the conversations among staff where we're not involved and where the warden's not there, those are the conversations where they can really cement or strengthen their views of what we're doing and what our agenda is. And then from the informal point of view, it's just literally the time and interactions that happen when you are in a place for a long time. And a lot of those are just casual, off the cuff conversations. I've had great conversations with staff about weightlifting, about basketball, about gambling, about sports betting, about art, about literature, a lot about family. That's a common connector. I have a lot of interests. And so I find I have a lot of kind of ammunition in this way to find a common interest and use that as kind of an entry point into maybe a deeper connection. But, that's not always possible. But over time, those walls start to break down. You build trust and you build legitimacy in the institution. And that's an ongoing process. I would not count that as 100% success at this point.
The positive comments I've heard, and the reason I think they're positive is it seems to me that you've spent a lot of time not only talking about what you're researching, but maybe spending just as much, if not more time on why you're researching that. And that's huge to build trust among staff and those incarcerated.
And also just to show you're a human being, if I could just add that. I think researchers we can seem like kind of aliens kind of coming in. And then, to let them see over time, like, no, I'm just a person like you are. I have this job, you have that job, but we both have families. We both like sports. We both like to buy sneakers, whatever it is, there are different ways we connect. But I'm not an alien. And I mean, that has a racialized component with me as well. There's not a lot of Asian cats in this facility. And so like, me looking the way I do already makes me more alien than a researcher will already look. And so I think I have a slightly longer bridge to cross, but it's crossable.
In the past, corrections is somewhat used to what I call analysis paralysis, where all kinds of things are looked at. And then once it's looked at, it's thrown on a shelf and sits there. So congratulations on the way you're doing this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Dana, another feature of the initiative is the creation of a new role within each pilot facility, the Prison Research and Innovation Manager. You currently serve in that role at the Moberly Correctional Center. Can you talk a little bit about what that position entails and how it differs from other positions in the facility?
Well, it's kind of an island on its own, and I like to use that term because I really can mold it to do whatever fits me or the facility at that time, or even our project. I also think it's important to know that I came from corrections already. So I was a DOC employee. So when I got to Moberly, I just needed to learn Moberly. I didn't need to learn corrections. So COVID slowed our project way down, but that allowed me to really acclimate and spend time with our staff and our residents there before we even started doing any of the data collection. And by saying that it's an island all on its own, and because of my prior knowledge of corrections, during the time of COVID, when we were really hit with staff shortages, I was able to fill in different vacancies. And by doing that, I was gaining trust from our staff and letting them really understand that this project is for them, and we're there doing work for them. And besides my work inside the institution, it's also allowed me to kind of step outside of the institution and do some work in the communities, which I think is so important because I'm out advocating for our people that live in the facilities and that work there. So it's allowed me to be just this unique part of corrections that I can kind of mold and use it however we need to.
Thank you. For Alan and Dana, again, as people who are working in corrections and actively engaged in this project, can you talk a little bit about the staff results from your respective state climate survey? And were there things that resonated with you as a result of that survey?
Dana, you want to start?
Sure. We were not surprised that the challenges right now with our staff is the critical staffing crisis. Like we are also exhausted and we're at critical levels. But with that being said, some of the things that did surprise me was 77% of our staff either agreed or strongly agreed that when asked if they like their job more than the average worker, then they said yes, they do like their job more than the average worker. And when asked if they were satisfied with their quality of life, over half said yes. So even though we are at such a difficult time in corrections, they still want to be there. And we're at this core group of our staff right now that's just holding it together, and they want to stay there.
Thank you, Jeff. Researchers often list corrections work among the most stressful occupations and dangerous, I might add. Can you talk a little bit about how stress, work-life balance, and mental health more broadly seem to affect officers in Colorado?
Yeah, I would say, just to reiterate some of what's been said earlier in this panel, there are two key realities, I think, that shape this answer. One is the understaffing crisis, and the other is COVID. In terms of understaffing, what we're seeing is that kind of understaffing is begetting understaffing. So, low when the staff numbers are critically low as they are now, you have reassignments, you have double shifts going on, overtime, and a lot of these mechanisms are to maintain the necessary security and safety functions of the facility, but obviously they are not great for staff morale when, you know, you're working hours you didn't predict you were going to be working, or, you know, you're coming home way more tired, or you're working a post that that you're not trained to work. So, you know, we have, like in Sterling, teachers have had to work security posts of case managers, and things like that. And, you know, that has a number of repercussive effects through the institution. Number one, you have a teacher working a security post. It also means that class is not being taught also because that teacher is on another post. And so, you know, each reassignment kind of like echoes out in different ways in the institution, and that's driving up stress, and that's driving up dissatisfaction with work. And I don't think that's that controversial that those types of mechanisms would drive up stress. So, you know, we have over 70% of staff survey respondents saying they have high stress at the job. We have almost 80% saying that the job affects their mental health. We have about a third saying that they drink or use drugs more than they would like because of their job. And only about a third look forward to coming to work every day. That said, 80% of our staff respondents said that they took pride in their job. And so what we see is there's this kind of distinction between the job in the abstract, what you kind of think you are, you know, why are you doing this job? To keep the public safe, to help people, incarcerated people get rehabilitated, whatever these larger scale goals. There's a lot of pride in that, but our staff are not thinking that they can accomplish those goals because of the understaffing crisis and the way that that's been exacerbated by COVID as well. And so I won't get too much into the impacts of COVID, but it exacerbated these staffing stresses in any number of ways. And so we see really, really high stress in the job, but great pride in the work. And we also find that a really large percentage of our staff in Sterling, about 90% would argue that they have a helping orientation to their work. So 89% say that supporting incarcerated people is part of their job. 91% saying that helping incarcerated people meet their goals. They enjoy helping incarcerated people meet their goals. But in our interview data and in other, you know, survey items, you see that they don't think they can accomplish these things particularly effectively in the current environment. And again, understaffing, the exacerbation of that, and all the just rapid and unpredictable changes that resulted from COVID, they're all part of that. And to me, the institution from a staffing point of view now is exhibiting a lot of organizational characteristics of resource deficiency, where, you know, there's a lot of dissatisfaction, communication conflict, a lot of role conflict as well, as people are kind of reassigned to these different areas, or they feel that what they're doing is not serving the purpose they want to serve, right? So many want to help incarcerated people and feel that, you know, what they're able to do in the current moment under these conditions is not doing much to help. And so they have this kind of role conflict between that, and then just a lot of overall stress, which is leading to more people leaving. It's leading to smaller academy classes, and it's leading to just, you know, less satisfaction in the institution. So back to my original point, understaffing begets understaffing.
Yeah, and that's not unique to Colorado. Alan, the Vermont climate survey found that 6% of the staff said there are enough staff to meet the current needs of the prison, and 97% indicated that frequent staff turnover was a problem. DOCs across the country obviously are having similar issues. Can you talk about some of the challenges you are facing in recruitment and retention?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. One of the biggest challenges facing us right now is the state of Vermont has a 2.5% unemployment rate. There's approximately 40,000 jobs open and only about 10,000 people that are looking for work. And DOC isn't always the place where people are heading first. So for us, the challenge is really getting out there and marketing. But marketing is also very difficult in a time when staff are tired, they're overworked, you know, mandatory overtime. They don't make good salespeople, right? It's hard for them to say, come work at our department when I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and I don't get to spend time with my family. So for us, it's where do we find that balance? to get them the relief they need while retaining staff. Staff come in through our recruitment strategies are working. We're getting people in the door. We have a $2,500 sign-on bonus right now. We're providing $50 shift bonuses for everybody that's working in the facility. So it's basically a $6 an hour raise for the folks in uniform working the security posts. And those numbers are climbing. We're seeing 18 to 20 recruits in each of our classes. And we already have, I think, 8 or 10 in our scheduled for our next academy in May. So we're, those numbers are climbing up, but it really falls back to the retention issue. How do we retain our staff? When we're looking at exit interviews, it's how they're being treated, and they're not leaving a bad job. They're leaving a bad supervisor is a lot of what we're hearing. To the earlier point, people like their job, to what Dana was talking about. The surveys that we've seen have said people like what they do. They just want a day off. They want to be able to relax and have a life. So finding that balance, finding ways to retain the staff through, back to what Scott had said, the cultural competency. Culture is a huge piece of what we struggle with, much like recruitment and retention in every agency. I don't think there's a correctional agency out there that doesn't say they have an issue with culture. But culture is hard to change as well. It's not an easy task. Getting a facility on track for a cultural change, you need the staff to stay there and have that buy-in. And when there's constant staff turnover, you can't change that mentality of why should I be here, or why do I want to stick around for this job? Daryl spoke on the first panel about the need for research to address culture, and that's where print is great. We are doing that. We are seeing results, and nobody's walking away, right? To Jeff's earlier point, researchers come in and then you never see anything. Our staff and our population is seeing something now. They have a voice. They're being heard. We had 70% engagement in our survey from our staff and from the inmate population. That's huge. 70% engagement in a survey is just unheard of. And the issues that were identified were very similar across the board from the incarcerated population and from the staff. That tells me that those people are communicating, they're working together, they are engaging, the staff are engaging with the population, and they're seeing a lot of the same things, and they want the same things addressed. And I think if we can get to a point where we're able to address those things in a positive way and institute that change, I'm hopeful we'll see the retention rates increase.
Yeah, once they get in the door, keeping them inside the door is a whole different question. And a lot of it too, I think, is centered around training. A lot of states, the training academies are so short in duration that the majority of the time is spent dealing with the physical aspects of the job and not the mental aspects. And so very quickly, these new correctional officers get wore out. So we'll leave this one then. This is perfect because Scott, who started as a correctional officer, after many years, he worked his way through all the positions just about in corrections and became a very progressive head of Connecticut Department of Corrections. So Scott, why don't you solve this problem for us?
So the timing of this question is great, because I was just having this discussion yesterday, and I do want to mention, for the benefit of the audience, we have a director on this call now listening to what the answers are. Her name is Ann Presythe from Missouri, but she also happens to be the president of the Correctional Leaders Association, which encompasses all of the directors around the United States and then some. And this is a hot topic for that association. And I don't think there's any clear answers, because every system is navigating through solutions to this issue in their own way. A lot of jurisdictions have been forced to become very insular in terms of what their approach needs to look like. And I think that we need to begin the process of recognizing that this is a national problem. And because it's a national problem, it requires a national response to formulate mechanisms to begin the process of finding ways that we can enhance recruitment and retention issues in these systems. It starts with salaries, right? And are they on par with other criminal justice entities? And then the complex aspect of that is that we're not just talking about uniform custodial staff. We're talking about healthcare delivery folks, clinical folks, licensed folks, educators, treatment staff individuals, maintenance people. And when you try to pull these people in to come work for a Department of Correction, we have to recognize something that's very evident. And you all know is that the general public has a television perception of this work, right? They watch it on reality TV and every movie that comes out, and it doesn't depict this work in a manner that you would be attracted to wanting to go inside these correctional facilities. But I did do a quick list of some things that need to be in this discussion, that there's people far more qualified than me to answer it. But I think if we do this on a national scale, the outcomes will be far greater. And I also think that it has to be inclusive of statewide elected officials and federal elected officials as well, to begin a discussion as to how we can be responsive to this issue. And it's not just correctional professionals, it's law enforcement in general around this country. But I started with competitive salaries. That's a no-brainer. But thinking out of the box, maybe there's part-time opportunities in corrections where we can bring people in to begin that process. And then coupled with that is like creating academic relationships with academia to influence people to take a look at corrections as part of their profession. Bringing criminal justice students into the environment, and then maybe offer, and this has been done before in other jurisdictions, seasonal employment opportunities. Systems have to respond to vacations and alike, and maybe there's a way that you can do that. I also think there are ways that you can invest in correctional professionals, right? And you can do that through academic approaches as well, and be able to give some incentive for people to stay on board because they can obtain and further their career path through academic opportunities. And I think that those are things that we all need to take into consideration. The other thing that I think that and this has been talked about before, first of all, you want the right people. You just don't want a body, right? And we have to get out of our own way and become much more transparent in the way that we do business inside these closed systems. And I would argue that they have become even more insular as a result of what's occurred because of the pandemic. And there's a lot of hypervigilance and hypersensitivity to staff right now. If any system that you would go to now, you're not going to find folks that are going to be up on the morale scale, right? So there's these issues of pervasive matters that have to be addressed, and then the responsivity to these single points of failure that will happen in systems, and everything just falls apart. I think we have to recognize all that, and we have to bring the community into our systems to see what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. It was mentioned before on another area, but I think the more that corrections departments are transparent, the more people are going to realize the assistance that corrections needs, and also open up a world to them that they aren't aware of. And that would help also to normalize what goes on within these facilities. In the past, corrections departments have been very slow to open their doors up to anybody, frankly. And luckily, that's changing in at least a few jurisdictions. Dana, a majority of Moberly staff agreed that what the DLC stands for to them is important, and that they feel a strong sense of belonging at their facility. Can you talk a bit about Moberly's organizational culture and how it works to support staff?
Sure. Well, I have a bunch of notes here on how our staff believe in rehabilitation. They trust the process. They're open to change. They have the skills they need to do their job. And they do feel like they positively influence the incarcerated population. But that aside, I think what it comes down to with the structure at Moberly is balance and care. Balance because our leadership there is balanced leadership. We have a deputy warden that has been in multiple institutions and came up through custody and really understands safety and security and how to manage the officers and that side of it. But then we have another deputy warden that he started in custody, but came up through classification and really understands that part of the job. And then at the time of our survey, our warden was a social worker. So, she had that role. So the balance is the approach of having such a open-minded leadership there. But then the care comes in just as I was leaving to come do this. I had a staff member come to me and say, hey, one of our spouse teams, it's a custody husband and classification wife, they had a baby and the baby's in the NICU. She's like, we're going to do a bake sale, little things like that type of care. Even when my father passed away suddenly in December, the warden drove 3 hours and brought food to the visitation, that type of care. So, our survey definitely tells us that on paper, we have what we need to do our job and all that kind of stuff, but it's the care that, they're feeling. And when I say family, we have generations of staff members that are there at Moberly. We have a lot of spouse teams. And so it really is a lot of family members there, but they've had their whole careers there, most of them. So they know the institution inside and out, and they want to do right. And that starts from the very top all the way to the very bottom. And I also want to add, I feel like that we can stretch that out, not just at Moberly. I don't think that's super unique to Moberly. I think that is a message that's sent all over Missouri.
Yeah, and I think that correctional workers receive a bad rap. You don't hear a lot of good stories in the media. And when you ask them, why don't they print the good stories, you typically get a response, well, no one wants to read or see the good stories. It's the bad ones. And, overwhelmingly, I've seen correctional officers involved with those that are incarcerated with their families, with their children, like you say, special functions, being involved in Special Olympics, doing a lot of things outside of corrections that help their own communities. And I think there needs to be a bit more talk about that, so that even those that are thinking about applying at corrections see the good things that are happening. Thank you. Scott, in your experience, do reforms need to be aimed separately at staff in the incarcerated population, or are there ways of introducing changes that benefit both groups? How can we frame reforms as collective efforts and not as a zero-sum game? And I think, you're the perfect one because of your European experience. I think you're a good one to answer this.
Oh, thanks, Rick. But, some aspects of reform, I think, can be done collectively. But we also need to recognize that whatever reforms are going to be determined need to be operationalized, right? So you may not be able to do that in a collective way. But here's what I will tell you from personal experience. It was not until later in my career when I was, a deputy commissioner or a commissioner, the number one or number two in the agency, where I recognized the value of formerly incarcerated people. And it was a situation where I was invited to an event at a community college, and the folks that were there were all being recognized for their work in academia or in the labor force. But driving home that night, I finally had come to the realization that, and I think people can relate to this, is that that was the first opportunity in my career over 30 years where I actually saw success, right? So 6 months prior to that, the only thing that I would see is what was coming into the system, right? Put that under the umbrella. I don't like to use this terminology, as people who have failed and end up in the justice system for one reason or another. But now I see success. So what do correctional professionals see any day on any given time, especially frontline staff? Only what comes into the system. They never see the outcome of what success looks like unless they're married to it somehow, meaning that a loved one has been touched by the system, and they can relate to those experiences. So from a zero-sum game perspective, I think that you have to equate all of that to what is the most meaningful benefit to that. So an example would be like program-driven reforms may equate to less trauma exposure for everyone inside of a facility. It may reduce harm in a literal sense. And that's something that would be attractive to anybody who's touched by the system. And I think it's something that's more of a common sense approach, and that we need to pay closer attention to in trying to drive what reforms look like. A good example, and Rick, in your old state of Colorado, they had applied for some grant work that was being done by Vera, and the administration in Colorado submitted the application, and it was put together by currently incarcerated people and in collaboration with staff to identify, what they hope the outcome could be of engaging in this opportunity. So I think those are all good things. And I think because of the state of corrections right now, we're going to have more reliance on people who know the system. And, when I was a director or commissioner and we were implementing reforms in my state, I spent an immense amount of time with the consumer, people who had been in the system, to get their perspective and feedback and to understand if what we were trying to do was going to have a substantial impact. And I'll share with you that I expected those folks to say it's the programs and that's having such an impact that's influencing change. And programs are great, but that's not what they said. They said it's the people. They said it's the people that they engage with that are their peers, and correctional staff that have been able to influence change. The programs are just an added bonus, and whatever else that comes, skill sets that come with that. So I think that we have to be very, very cognizant of that. The last panel, a gentleman by the name of David, who had been justice involved, talked about passion. And I think, when we take in all of the intricacies and complexity of evidence-based practices, we really need to be in the business of passionate facilitation, because that's what makes a difference in people's lives.
I can speak from personal experience on, can it benefit both? And the answer is wholeheartedly yes. We had a Supermax in Colorado, and working with some great staff, we were able to repurpose that and dramatically reduce the use of solitary confinement, now known as restricted housing. The climate change in that facility among staff and those incarcerated was absolutely, I call it miraculous. Can you imagine if you're a correctional officer and you're in a Supermax and you go to work 8 to 12 hours a day, and you hear banging and screaming and self-harm and suicide, and people throwing themselves against the wall and throwing things at you, and you go home and your partner goes, "How was your day, dear?" It sucked. I mean, what else could it be? And now you walk into that same facility where you see employers coming in to pre-interview for pre-release, and the staff interacting in a positive manner with those incarcerated, and vice versa. It's truly something to watch. One last question for all the panelists is really things you've heard today and the things you've seen among your own careers. What do you think is the most important thing that needs to be done in this area, or what has impacted you the most? Scott, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Rick. You know, I think we need to take this personal, right? And just get bold about what correctional practices need to look like in this country. Forget about everything we're measured up against, such as recidivism, and let's focus on principles of normalcy as best that we can. And then just, you know, just kind of understand that from a personal perspective, if it was your kid or your loved one or someone that you cared about, how do you want the system to treat that person?
And I think that we've got 3 minutes before we open this up for question and answers. So Dana, go ahead.
I just think changing public perception is where we have to start, getting in the communities and speaking and letting them know what's going on. I coming from community-based employment prior to corrections, I knew nothing about corrections, and I had a prison in my town. And then once I came inside, I was just absolutely blown away at the fabulous things that go on in these prisons with our residents and our staff. And I think we need to do a better job of letting the public know that, because how are we ever going to get the support we need if we're not telling them how great we are, right?
You bet. Jeff?
I'd like to build on Scott's point a little bit about being bold but get narrower about it. The thing I've been thinking about a lot is in terms of the staffing crisis and the workload crisis. That actually there's two variables wrapped up in that. One is the number of staff and/or staff hours you have to meet your work demands. But then the other variable are the work demands themselves. And so we've seen some innovative changes in our facility, and there are changes happening in other facilities that can reduce workload on staff, right, without necessarily compromising safety. Now that remains a question, but for example, the loosening of the dress code in Sterling Correctional Facility on one side of the facility means that staff do not have to crack down on dress code violations on that side of the facility. That reduces work. There is an honor unit in the facility in which there are no permanent staff inside the units, in which the residents have their own keys that open the door, and you obviously have to kind of ascend to get the privileges to be in that unit. But obviously having a unit like that where there are no full-time staff assigned to be inside, because those incarcerated people have gained the trust of the institution, are allowed to do that, that reduces staff workload. So I think it's important for us to think about both sides of that. Like if you are a state with small academy classes like we are, and it doesn't look like there's a flow of people coming in, right? How can you adjust the other variable in that equation is the question I would ask.
Thank you. And Alan?
I would go with where Dana went, the transparency and the marketing piece of it. We need to tell our story. For way too long, the media has told our story, and it's not an accurate representation of what goes on inside the walls. There's a lot of good things that happen, whether it be programming, whether it, life-saving measures, just the teamwork and all that. We don't get to tell that story, and when we do try to tell it, it's not always taken by the media. They're waiting for the next bus crash. They're not looking for a feel-good story. So anything we can do to promote the good that is happening inside of our facilities is where we need to be. And that goes back to my earlier discussion on recruitment as well. I mean, once we get out there and tell all the positive things that happen inside of a system, who wouldn't want to be part of change, right? I mean, we hear that all the time. People want to be part of a change culture, change organization, and let's market that to make that happen.
Every good correctional officer can tell you that they were out in the community somewhere, and someone walked up to them and said, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, you probably don't remember who I am, but you changed my life. And that correctional officer, in most cases, won't even remember what it was that they did, because they're so used to just doing the right things with those incarcerated. There's so many stories like that. So let's get to thank all of you. Let's get to the first audience question. And Al, this one's for you. Can you talk a little bit about the staff's survey results on the climate survey, were there things that resonated with you or caught you by surprise? What has been the public's reaction been, and what are some things the audience can do to be supportive of making change?
Yeah, I think the one thing that caught me by surprise, and I mentioned it earlier, is how many staff and incarcerated individuals were involved in the survey. There was a lot of interest across the entire facility in a time when we are short-staffed, when we are battling COVID, and 70% of the people we serve and work with participated. That's huge. So it tells me that staff are invested in that facility. The population that lives there is invested in that facility. They want to see change, and we all know change is inevitable in any system. And if we can focus on where they want the change and what they identify as needs for change, let's do that. Let's start pushing that forward. The biggest thing as far as what resonated the most with me is around the staff thoughts of suicide. One of the questions was, in the last 12 months, have you thought of harming yourself? 10% of our staff said yes. That's 0.5% is too much. But when 10% of your staff say they have thought about suicide in the last year, something needs to change. And that's the conditions inside, that's the hours, that's the staffing shortage, that's staff not getting time away, that's staff not being able to have that work-life balance that we always talk about. That was what hit me the hardest. I think that's what hit all of our staff the hardest, was to sit back and hear that. Was it surprising? No. But did it resonate? Absolutely. That's just unacceptable. We need to be better. We should not be responsible for our staff feeling that way in any way, shape, or form. One of the things we've done is we've set up a suicide prevention task force with staff across all 6 of our facilities and our central office, our mental health clinicians, and it's to address that issue for staff, but for the incarcerated population as well. We know it's an issue. We know that that's a problem, and we need to do something better to address that. There's ideas that committee is coming up with a lot of ideas to do that. Staff wellness, yoga, mindfulness, just different things outside the box that we can do to help our staff. We have an amazing peer support group amongst our staff. We have a clinician on staff that is working with our staff now that request it. We've stood up a family support network. So it's family members of our correctional officers, whether it's spouses or parents or children. Just these are the people that are affected as well by the job. It's not just the person going in the front door. It's the ones that they're coming home to as well. And that we've seen great success with that. It's just an opportunity for those family members to get together and talk about things and vent and share experiences. They're not alone, right? I think many staff, families, or spouses feel that they are alone, experiencing what the officers feeling or going through, or not being home because they're working a double shift. So we're taking all that into account as we move forward and looking at all of those different areas.
For those in the audience, through the Correctional Leaders Association with President Preseth and Colette Peters from Oregon, staff wellness has become a huge issue. And it's really about time we really took a good hard look at this, and many of them are, thank goodness. And hopefully what we're seeing today is not going to be what we're seeing tomorrow, because there are a lot of changes being made. I know that, when I was in Europe and I went to staff lounges, they were truly lounges. And I say, yeah, we have lounges here. They're called control centers, and you'll see a bag of Doritos and a liter of Coke sitting on them. And if we were to have the type of lounges, relief areas for staff here like they had in Europe, I'm pretty sure the legislators would have been running me out of town on a rail. But I mean, so we have to change some of those attitudes too. Jeff, as the panel discussed, doing research with correctional officers is especially important to make change. Can you talk a little bit about challenges associated with getting correctional staff to trust the survey. You talked about this a little bit, but maybe go into a little more detail, or if there was a challenge getting them to change this. How did you do it, especially the more negative ones? Because I know it wasn't all positive.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing is it's unclear why people fill out a survey, right? So we were expecting a relatively low staff response rate. We ended up getting mid 40s response rate, I think about 45%. Shannon, you could type in the right answer in the chat if you have it. So that was quite high, obviously. I've heard some higher numbers in this panel that make me feel very jealous, but that was a big success for us. However, some of our staff board members and other staffers that we were talking to were saying, some of the people who are most dissatisfied will be the ones most eager to fill out the survey. And so, I think there's a bit of an Amazon Uber dynamic in it, where it was kind of like the most and least satisfied were probably the most likely to fill it out, but we certainly got, a wide variety of response types. Again, I think the staff advisory board was critical, and just the time spent. So them being able to go out and advocate, especially the staff advisory board, that was comprised of really critical line staff members in the facility, some of whom had quite a bit of influence, because of their tenure or their personality or their rank or whatever it might be. That was true on the incarcerated people's side as well, for different reasons why they have influence. But I think them sort of learning to trust us, seeing that we were authentic about what we were saying and that we would follow through with what we said, I think was really important. I think there is a very powerful idea in the institution, and maybe in corrections generally, that talk is cheap. Researchers, academics, we're really good at talking. We're really, really good at talking. But I think that has been some of the history and some of the resentment built up around staff that, a guy like me, someone like Shannon, we could come in, we could talk a good game, and then we still rip off the data and run away at the end, or we still don't come through and say and make happen what we said was going to happen. And so for us, it's been big and small things, right? When we say, the survey is going to happen around this time, and then it gets delayed, and then it gets delayed again, we go to that board, we email, the bodies in the facility and say, this is what's happening. We have not forgotten about you. We are pushing as hard as we can, but this is the reason it's held up right now. And small things too, like, both on the incarcerated side and on the staff side, we gave out very, very small incentives for taking the survey. The staff got a little Cliff Bar. The incarcerated folks got a tiny little like Halloween Snickers bar. And, those things started to matter a little bit, where people were saying like, where's my Cliff Bar? Where's my Snickers bar? Right. Especially on the incarcerated side. But we see these dynamics everywhere about like, if you can't follow through on the Snickers bar thing, how are you going to follow through on the innovation thing? Right. It's a kind of a broken windows philosophy to some extent. But, we found that we had to, we were very conscious, and I'll say that, Shannon is a lot better at this than me on our research team at keeping us on track. But, we really tried to stay on track in terms of what we promised and delivering what we promised. And if we couldn't deliver exactly as promised, explaining why that couldn't happen and why it didn't happen, and delivering as fast as we could. And so it's also, it's about what you say, but, we find in the institution, it's a lot about what you do. Also, you're going to have to prove yourself, like, in your actions.
And briefly, if you could discuss, once these survey results are placed in the hands of the leadership, at least in the state you're working in, what's been the response?
Well, this is like happening now, so I'm not exactly sure what I'm sort of allowed to say. I'll try to be discreet.
Right. Understood.
We have shared with those bodies in the institution, the three bodies we formed within the institution, and we've recently shared with Colorado Department of Corrections leadership. That discussion is kind of ongoing. I can't say I know exactly what they think with specificity, but they seem to be currently supporting what we do. The bodies in the facility and the leadership as well. What makes us feel good is they are not too surprised about what we're finding, that the report results are what are to be expected. given their deep knowledge of this institution, this organization, but they bring like very specific numbers and data to the ideas that are kind of swirling around unevidenced right now. And so I think part of the reason it's going relatively well in terms of reception to the research is honestly that the research kind of supports things that a lot of folks were thinking already.
Gotcha. Scott, you've got about 8 minutes if you can answer this one. You mentioned salary and whether it's on par with other law enforcement professions. Is that where you see your potential workers going, or does corrections need to compete with other industries? Like if Amazon opens a warehouse, for example, or in Colorado, like when the oil fields are going full steam ahead.
The simple answer is yes and yes. Rick and I, we're colleagues. We work together on a lot of projects around the country, and I think you hit the nail on the head that we talk with different leaders and people in the business, and they say that it's a here today, gone tomorrow scenario. If there is in some jurisdictions an Amazon warehouse down the street, because it's equal to salary without all the stress and trauma, presumably, I guess. I've never worked in an Amazon warehouse, but I would assume some semblance of stress there based on what I see running up and down my street. But anyway, so in my biased opinion, we need to kind of reevaluate, what salaries look like. And this gets back to the whole perception issue of what correctional professionals do. Some people perceive them to be glorified sitters to some degree, and all of you on this call and many in the audience know that it's extraordinarily complex, and you have to be responsive to a number of different issues that are sometimes out of your bailiwick, right? Being able to identify if someone's in some type of mental health distress, being cognizant of stressors that can occur as a result of incarceration or things that are maybe going on outside of the secure environment that could have an impact on one's well-being. So, I think that we don't fully recognize the role and function and the importance of correctional personnel has as a profession, or as it fits itself into the criminal justice community.
Dana, last question. You said you kind of felt like you were an island, which raises an interesting audience question. Which is, how are you able to develop a rapport with people who are incarcerated and differentiate yourself, if you do, from other staff members?
Well, I am located in a very public spot. I'm right outside of mental health, probation, and parole. So I peruse their waiting room quite a bit when they're just sitting there, and I just chit chat them up often, and they're used to seeing me that way. But I also go spend time in the wings. I've sat in on like anger management classes, or I go to recreation. So when they're in rec, I go hang out, talk to people, or just make myself available for them to come talk to me. I try to do that with as little burden on my staff as possible. So when it comes time to see the PC guys, when they're in recreation, I go there because then I can see them without taking an additional staff member to escort them to me. So I try, as much as I try to be in the housing units and with the incarcerated population, I'm also doing kind of double duty while helping my staff out as well, which is helping me with the rapport with them too. So when I say I'm on an island, it allows me to move within the facility, and I'm not affecting operations by not sitting at my desk. And that's what I mean by island. Like I can do just about anything in the institution without it affecting anybody else's job.
Right. All right. Well, is Nancy on?
Hi, Rick. I'm here.
Okay, Nancy. Hi. Well, panelists, thank you so much for being part of this. I was very honored to be able to moderate it with this group of experts. It's always fun, and thank you. I'd like to introduce Nancy Rodriguez to give some remarks. She's a professor with the University of California. So thank all of you so much, and I'll be going offline now.
Thank you, Rick. Before I share a few final thoughts, let me begin by, of course, thanking all of our panelists. What a day it's been. Thank you for your leadership around prison reform. We all benefit from that. I think collectively, the work we heard about today is inspiring and really motivates us to work harder to bring about change and ultimately reduce harm and improve the well-being of those impacted by incarceration. So a few final remarks as we wrap up today. I will be brief. I know it's been a long day for us. So our discussion today, for me, I feel really reinforces the value of bringing people together from a diverse group of stakeholders, right, to the table to share and learn from one another. I don't think we do this enough, and I applaud the Urban Institute for doing what I think we should be doing more of so that we can truly advance reform. One powerful element, I think, of convening is that we get to see and hear from correctional institutions how different, right, they are. Even within a state, they can certainly have their own cultures and different challenges. So the more that we bring folks together, I think the more we do to really fully understand the heterogeneity of who we serve, their needs, their risks, and how we might be able to scale reform. So as I listened to the panelists, I was really reminded of the interrelated nature, I think, of humanity and dignity and well-being for those confined, and as well as for correctional staff. The conditions of confinement and correctional issues like programming and mental health, physical health, and the contact and access that loved ones have with those on the outside. It also impacts, of course, the work environment for staff. It impacts levels of stress. It impacts the work-life balance, and obviously the recruitment and retention challenges, which we just heard about. Yet, unfortunately, for the most part, I think researchers study these as distinct phenomena. Right. So I hope as we continue this work, we see the relationship between the well-being among incarcerated individuals and staff, and pursue projects and initiatives that really highlight this nexus. So for me, that means that when implementing a policy or a program aimed at improving the well-being of incarcerated individuals, we ask, what does this mean for staff? It also means, right, that when we adopt strategies that center the safety, health, and wellness of staff, we ask, what does this mean for the incarcerated population? So I would like to certainly elevate the researchers and the correctional leaders we heard from today. It is really exciting, I think, to see and hear about successful researcher-practitioner collaborations. All too often, we hear about the failed collaborations. So to see partners working together towards change and knowledge development, I think is super encouraging. We also heard about the critical role that participatory research, including street par, can play in this space, yet more broadly in the field. I think still many see it as quite fringe. So I hope that we are open, right, to these different methods of developing knowledge, and hopefully, right, can document what we have to gain, their promise, as well as their limitations, especially the role of bias and the opportunity to hold ourselves accountable, right, for these biases and perspectives and positions that we hold. So I think we have here a tremendous opportunity to write about these different methods, and hopefully could be adopted and pursued, right, by others outside of this effort. So I want to maybe end with a topic that I feel is very central, but often not discussed given its controversy, and that is litigation, in particular, reform via litigation. So today we heard about the Prison Research Innovation Initiative as a vehicle for reform, but we know that litigation can also be a driver, right, of reform that takes place within institutions. So litigation can provide an incentive for reform. It can provide required services for incarcerated populations. It can address inadequate staffing or improve staff training, right? It can reduce crowding and could also improve overall, right, institutional conditions. So I would ask, what do we know about reforms being led by litigation alongside efforts like PRE? Are they working towards the same objective in defining and addressing problems? Or are there tensions that make these reforms and the development of knowledge more challenging? So I hope we could have honest discussions about these different drivers of reform. As someone who conducts research in correctional institutions, that is often, right, the elephant in the room. Litigation playing out as we are trying to better understand some pretty complex phenomenon. So I would ask, for example, what does the litigation process mean for incarcerated individuals or staff involved or not involved, right, in litigation? What does it mean for key stakeholders? What does it mean for researchers? What does it mean for access and transparency? And ultimately, the development of knowledge. So in closing, as a researcher who works closely with criminal justice systems and stakeholders, I'm hopeful and I'm so excited after today and hearing about the work being done. I'm particularly excited about the use of science in these discussions and truly the deep commitment that we heard about for reducing the social harms caused by incarceration. So with that, I thank you for joining us today. I remind you to please complete the survey and hope you will continue to follow this important work. Be safe and be well, everyone. Have a good day.